Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and our program, Get to Know. I'm your host, DP Lyle, and I'm here with my cohort in crime, Kathleen Antrim.
Thanks, Doug. It is great to be here, and we've got a fantastic interview for you today. We've got the extraordinary Thomas Perry. He's an award-winning and best-selling author of what now, Tom? Over 30 books, I believe?
32 so far.
32. Yeah, I mean, just amazing. You've had an incredible career and a very eclectic life. So I want to dig in a little bit on that, and I want to start with your childhood. And
Oh.
I was wondering if you felt your childhood contributed to you becoming an author. Were you an introverted child? Did you have imaginary friends? Were you extroverted, athletic? Tell us about it.
Wow. I was a third child, and therefore there wasn't enough room in the house for imaginary friends. We were all we were all pretty active and spent every evening, after dinner talking, and so on. And of course, had very little to contribute, so I got a lot of practice listening as being the youngest person in the house. But my parents were both teachers, and so I had absolutely the ideal situation for becoming a writer. That is, they had very, very different tastes and read different sorts of books. And the house was full of books, and I was sort of given to understand at the very beginning of my life that anything that was very important that was thought or said in the world was eventually going to end up in a book on a shelf, just like the ones that were in my house. And so that was my experience of it. I had great parents, great brother and sister. So
Were you an outgoing child or were you introverted? Were you athletic?
uh, I was outgoing to the extent of that younger children often are. They want attention. They want to be, they sort of try to be funny and so on in order to, get other people to pay attention to them. Um, I was athletic because that was sort of the world that I grew up in. And my father had been a big swimming star when he was young. And my brother was actually ended up holding a state record for high schools for the 100-yard breaststroke. And, I swam for a while, but what I really liked in high school was running or playing soccer in the fall and running track in the spring. And, that was pretty much it. But
So then we kind of flash forward, and you have had quite a few eclectic jobs. So I'm really interested on how these various jobs came about. I mean, you were a commercial fisherman in Alaska, and you've done all kinds of things. So talk to us about how how this all came about.
well, the commercial fisherman thing wasn't in Alaska. It was in Santa Barbara, which was
Oh,
a whole
okay.
lot easier and different. But um, what it was my then brother-in-law, sort of my wife's sister's husband, was a diver who got abalone in the Santa Barbara Channel, in the Channel Islands. And at a certain point, we were visiting, and it was just right after I had finished getting my PhD in English. And I had sort of spent my life indoors, it seemed like, at that point, reading a lot of books and writing a lot of nonsense about those books. And the offer of going out and spending the next year or so as the boat tender for his, abalone diving seemed like a good idea. And so I did that for a year. And at that point, I'd sort of had enough and applied for a job at the University of California at Santa Barbara, which is where I met my wife.
Oh, well, tell us a little bit about that. How did you meet your wife?
Um, I had a peculiar job. I was the assistant to the provost of the College of Creative Studies, which is a very sort of strange and interesting experiment that the University of California did in the sort of late 60s, and it continues to this day. And I was in my office and the door was open. I always like to keep the door open because I wanted to have, students feel comfortable coming in and talking. And I looked outside the door and I could hear the Xerox machine going. And I kind of took a look through the door and I saw this woman. And yeah, that was it. It was just,
Did you walk out and say hello, or,
no, I was far too cool for that. No.
Oh, okay.
No,
All right.
the truth is I was also, I was married at the time, so that wasn't,
Oh,
that was not a thing that one does, but anyway.
So rather than meeting over candlelight, you met over Xerox light. I like that.
Yeah, that's right. It sort of flash.
the flash of the.
Flash.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So it's like an old movie.
Yeah, it was. This wasn't yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been married for 45 years. So.
Oh, congratulations. That's great. So when did you decide you were going to transfer and move into the world of commercial fiction writing and that you've done so well? How did that come about?
I always wrote, actually. It was, something I started doing when I was about 13 or so. And I, wrote stories and things like that. And also, of course, if you're the youngest child and you are trying to have a lot of arguments, what happens is that after the discussion is over and everybody leaves, you think of what you should have said. Mm-hmm. If you're a writer, what you do is you can rewrite that scene and say what you should have said.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, it is. So, it was just a natural thing to do. And it's, I was an English major. And so there was always it always seemed to me to be two halves of one activity, reading and writing. I mean, ideally, what you and I would do would be to write a story or tell a friend a story, and then the friend would tell you a story. Ideally, we would all be writing and we would all be reading what the other person said. And maybe someday the brain will evolve to the point where we can do that. So, but at the moment, it's one of those things that sort of goes in one direction. But it just happened to be something I love to do. And I also realized and learned quickly that, you don't actually have to tell anybody that you're a writer.
Yeah.
But what happens is if you tell them, they get to be afraid. They're afraid you're going to ask them to read something you've written. So, and then make up some complimentary thing to say about it. So
when did you write your first book? And did that first book get published, or
no?
Tell us about the process here.
No, I think the first time I actually finished anything that sort of deserved to be called a manuscript was when I was in college. I did it kind of as I don't know, an amusing relaxation thing to do after I had done my actual work. It was, let's say, probably a typical undergraduate novel. There's an awful lot of, I don't know, let's say introspection, which nobody would ever care about. But it was fun to do, and it was a good experience. So, after that, I was kind of hooked.
So from that point, so you write your first novel. I take it never got published. There was a common thread here for most of us. Our first novels, are in the drawer somewhere with lock and key. No one's ever to publish it. But from that point, how long was it then before you actually got a publishing contract and went on to publish?
Oh, let's see. When I was in college, I was 22, right? I graduated from college. And then I believe it was about 10 years later when I was, I had a degree and was working in universities, and I finally wrote something and I thought, somebody who wasn't related to me by blood or marriage might actually enjoy reading. And so, I began to try and find a publisher. And, I was very lucky because I happened to run in, see an article in a magazine. I think it was at the Atlantic at the time. And it was about, telling you that nobody could get anything published anymore if they weren't an insider of some sort, And, this person was really bent on just absolutely making us all stop writing. But what he did was the opposite. He told me exactly how to go about it. And it's essentially, what he had done was he took the last year's winner of the National Book Award, retyped the first 100 pages or so, and sent it to every major publisher in the United States. None of them recognized it, and none of them felt that it should be published. Okay. So the next month, there was this response from all of the publishers, presidents, and so on, and saying, well, that's not fair. That isn't how we operate. We go through agents. And so what he did was to retype the first 100 pages of the National Book Award winning novel and send it to the list of agents that the Authors Guild put out every year. It was a little blue pamphlet, right? And so he sent them all the manuscript, and none of them recognized it, and none of them felt it should be published. But I realized that the way to do it, I needed to have an agent, and I knew now where I could find a list of agents that were considered to be reputable. And so I went to work and started writing letters of inquiry to each of these agents. One of them answered, thank God it was a guy whose name began with a B, because I'd still be writing if I was trying to get through the alphabet. And he said, well, he responded to me and said, who are you? And I, wrote him a brief letter saying essentially, I'm nobody. And he said, well, send me the, a synopsis. And I sent him the synopsis. And then he said, sounds kind of interesting. Send it to me. I'll read it. So I sent him the manuscript, and he liked it. He got it published by Suzanne Kirk at Scribner's, and it won an Edgar. So that was
wow.
it.
And the rest is history.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
32 books later.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. As I explained to our younger child, the rest is homework.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you, Tom, we've been friends a long time and we've had a lot of discussions, but I've never really asked you this. I have to admit, I haven't read all your books, but I've read most of them because you're too prolific and I can't keep up. But one of the themes that recur in a lot of your books is someone trying to disappear, create a legend or a false identity, and or someone trying to find someone who has done that, usually both. How did you get attracted to that particular scenario, and how did you educate yourself? Because anybody reads these books, you have to read them, and they're great. All the Tom's books are great. But this whole system of trying to disappear in the modern world and then trying to find someone who's disappeared is a whole nother can of worms. How did you get into that?
Well, I'll tell you what happened was I'd written a few books, and at a certain point well, I guess the next thing that happened was that we had a female child. And I sort of started thinking about what heroism is, that would be acceptable to a female character, because I'd written all these novels, and really, if you look at them as a group, the first few, it appears that the world is populated mainly by very angry men, and that just isn't what the world looks like. And So I started thinking about writing something that would make sense. And the character Jane Whitefield came to me. That is, I was thinking about a lot of things at once. One of them was the history of where I was brought up, and which is the western end of New York State along the Niagara River. And I realized very quickly that all of the most interesting things that ever happened there happened before Europeans arrived. And I began to sort of develop this character who became Jane Whitefield, and she is a Seneca Indian. And one of the things that's sort of interesting about the Iroquois in general is that they, when the Treaty of Fort Stanwix ended the Revolutionary War for them, they were still basically where they had been for the previous 1,000 years or so. They were inhabited roughly the same place, because as it happened, there were at that moment over 2,000 Seneca warriors out in the impenetrable forests, heavily armed and accustomed to a life of hunting and fighting. And so, the terms that General Washington agreed to with them were pretty good, and they were still allowed to be basically where they had always been, and they're still there. I mean, a great number of them. So this is the person that this is the ethnicity of the person that I wanted to write about, this female person. And I realized that there was something that she would be willing to do, or would be able to do, to have let's say, an activity that made sense to her. And what always makes sense is saving somebody's life. And so what she does is she takes people who are, they have convincing reasons to believe that they are about to be murdered. And she takes them to new places where nobody knows them, and nobody essentially is immediately going to think they're going to go to, and teaches them to be new people. And as I sort of went along with this, the Jane Whitefield books, right now I'm sort of working on what would probably be the 10th one. She begins to look into all the things about identity. One of the things that happens is you're about to be murdered. You've obviously screwed up your life in some way. Here's a situation where, in order to save your life, you're going to get a chance to start all over again, choosing a new identity. What did you do wrong the last time? What do you wish you had done? Who do you wish you had been? All those questions begin to come up. And so, I just kind of got hooked on it. And like anything else, if you start thinking about it, answers come to you, which is sort of it's an odd, almost magical thing. That is, I will read an article about somebody or other who has a disease with a weird name. I've never heard of this disease before. I start to look into it. All of a sudden, I start finding articles about it. I happen to be talking to somebody who is a doctor. I happen to be doing that again today. But this person explains to me what the disease is, et cetera. Information comes to you if you listen, if you wait, and it happens, and you're thinking about it and you notice it. Maybe I actually had heard of it before, but I wasn't aware of it. It's just a great thing about writing. And you immediately run into somebody or other who, I don't know, her first boyfriend had that very disease, and she remembers every detail, and she's going to tell you all about the experience. And, all of that stuff is invaluable. It's just great stuff.
That brings me to a question too, is what is your process? Are you an outliner? Are you a pantser?
I'm sort of the ultimate pantser in some ways. When I finish a manuscript and, I'm actually sending it to submit it to my publisher. Once it's gone, I usually take maybe an hour or two, and then I start writing again. I start thinking about a character, and then I start, figuring out what's on his mind right now. What is it that he resents that has happened, or what is it that he's planning? What is, who is this person? And from then, you once you've started writing, you've pushed the toboggan off the edge of the
Right.
of the mountain, and you're picking up speed.
I agree with you 100%. To me, that's the fun part of writing. I'm a pantser too. You just put a character in a situation, see what happens. Just push play. You will
Right.
always find something. Somebody once told me, said, well, don't you get lost and all that? I said, well, sometimes you do, but you figure it all out. And somebody else standing there says, it's like a trapeze artist without a net. Just
Yeah,
jump, the net will appear.
that's true.
And I think that's so well put, and I agree with you. So, of all the books that you've written, and I love so many of them, before we get to your new one, we would be remiss without discussing this one, which I think is just a stellar book that everyone should read. And then, well, lo and behold, it turns up to be a streaming series that is nothing short of magnificent. How did this story come about, and how did it end up on the streaming service?
Well, it's I don't know. In some ways, what happens is that usually um, you start with a character, and this is the character that I started with, the old man. That is this guy who is going to spend this book being underestimated by people because he appears to be, kind of way past it and so on. But there's something that I put in the book that I remember and kind of liked having said, which is one of the people who has been against him and has been trying to find him says, yeah, he's old. He's old, kind of like a 7-foot rattlesnake is old, you know. And so it's something that he's a person who, had a kind of breakup with the intelligence work that he was doing and the people that were supervising him, and who essentially, abandoned him when he was in need. And now, many years later, an old enemy tries to find him, and he suspects that people within our own intelligence service have said that was okay. We'll find them and turn them over to you. So,
So again, it's back to that theme of someone creating a legend and disappearing, but yet getting tracked down. And I love that. And when I watched I read the book many years ago, and then I remember when I watched the first scene in the FX series, it was like, oh my God, because the uneducated reader, the non-reader who has not read the book, and you see that, and you see exactly what you're describing. Jeff Bridges, like, you wonder if he's going to make it to the bathroom to pee in time. And then all hell breaks loose.
I actually saw them filming that scene.
Yeah.
And it was that would happen to be the day that they invite the writer to
Yes.
come in and take a look and so on. And it was wonderful. I mean, both he and John Lithgow and Amy Brennemann, they're just wonderful. They were just so good, and they were so, if you watch these people work, you realize that in acting, success is not an accident. It's just a privilege to see him do it, and he was fiddling around with those tin cans that are tied together that he put on his staircase so that nobody would, could come in without his hearing it and so on. Just such attention to detail, and is this right? And will this look right? And and all
Well,
that.
how did this come about? How did you attract the attention of the movie maker people, series maker people about this particular story? How did that happen? I mean, this is every writer's dream.
Well, I've got a wonderful agent, and his name is Eric Reed, and he is, a partner in WME, and he, has always uh, essentially done everything he could to keep things in option, and eventually, if you option enough things, somebody's gonna fool you and make something out of it. So, uh, this is what happened was essentially there were two groups that were interested in that book, and they were both good, but one of them was Warren Littlefield. And from my time in television, Warren Littlefield I realized was essentially a giant in television. He was the guy who ran NBC when NBC, it was the, must-see TV and all that stuff. When the last episode was filmed of Cheers, he was at the bar. They put him in at the bar next to, I think, I don't know, George Wendt or somebody.
Yeah.
And he was, and he called me up and he said, I'd like to do this book, and, so on. And, and at that moment, I thought to myself, well, also, he was just at that moment, he was calling me from Toronto, where they were filming a Handmaid's Tale episode, and I was thinking, God, take it. Here, don't give me any money, just take it. That's what I was thinking. And of course,
Of course, your agent stopped that thought very quickly.
Thank
right.
goodness.
Well,
Yeah.
well, he wasn't on the phone at the time,
No.
but, that's what I was thinking. And it turned out to be right. It was a right decision. When I did see what they were doing, and I met the people, the production designer, and the others, the director, and everybody that were just wonderful. And
Were
I
you
even
involved in
said to
any of
them,
those things, the script development and all that stuff? Or
absolutely not.
yeah,
I
yeah,
did absolutely nothing. And, it partly, I don't ever offer to do that, because
right.
if I write a book, that's my take on the story. All the other trees have been barked up already. Every change that anybody makes is a decision that I wouldn't have made, But what happened was they had the writers, John Steinberg and and Robert Levine. What they wrote was not what I, wrote, but it was wonderful. I thought, it was terrifically well done, and you know, I have no complaints of, any of that. And when Warren Littlefield, just before, I don't know, the end of last season, they interviewed him about what he was doing then and so on. And he said, I love everyone who was involved in this show, you know? And I thought to myself, yeah, it shows.
It
They
does show.
deserve it, you know?
Yes.
And
And
The
not
acting,
everybody
the writing, the
gets that.
cinematography, everything about it is fantastic.
yeah, it was.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the problem is, of course, that it's not picked up for next year. So it's over. And that's
Really?
yeah,
That's a shame.
Oh, that's
happens.
too bad, because they sure left it where
Yeah,
where there's the next season. I mean, they got to go
yeah.
back.
You hate
Oh
it when
no,
that happens. Yeah.
yeah, it happens. That's the way that all shows die,
Yeah,
not
exactly.
picked up.
Suddenly.
Tell us about your new book.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about.
Ah, okay. Pro bono. Well, um, that's still another set of situations. I mean, this one is really, in some ways, what it's about is um, the complexity of ways in which very different people begin to interact, and it involves a lot of sort of well, fake identities. Um, to I guess I'm starting to feel that's probably a theme of my life. I don't know, but It's
Are you
also
really Thomas Perry? Or is that an alias?
and who else are you? Yeah, but the it's about a young lawyer who we get to know at the very earliest scenes um, when he's a teenager, and his mother is in the process of she is married essentially a con man, a guy who specializes in marrying vulnerable women, preferably widows, because they've accumulated some money. And then while he is married to them, he signs a lot of papers and ends up with essentially whatever money they have. And that's sort of his introduction to life, is that there are people who are fundamentally decent, who are going along with their lives and trying to raise their kids and all that stuff. And then there are people who want to prey on them. And so you sort of fade out and come back 17 years later when he's a young, successful lawyer. And one of the things that he has accomplished in his early part of his career is that he's taken a lot of situations where people were vulnerable to that sort of thing and protected them. He's a guy he's a lawyer with principles. But what only we readers know at that point is that he's a person who might do that, but the limits are far past what the average lawyer would do. I mean, he is willing to do things that are essentially criminal in order to make sure that somebody else is able to live. And,
Cool.
Wow, I can't wait to read it. So Thomas, tell us where our viewers can learn more about you, your website.
Oh, it's www, and all those things. thomasperryauthor.com. So it's
great.
Yeah.
And they can find all your wonderful books there and all about
Yes.
you, and that's fantastic. What are you working on now? Something new? Of course.
Something new that's also old. I'm doing another Jane Whitefield book.
Yes.
Okay. Because the last book, which was about, I don't know, at least 4 years ago, I left Jane and she was pregnant. And so somehow it's probably the longest pregnancy in history. And so I figured I had to pick it up and at least satisfy that question before.
Get her out of her misery.
Yeah, that's right.
Before we go back, I want to go back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier before we let you go. We don't want to keep you here too long, but even though I would enjoy that. Do you find that as this series progresses year by year and all that, and with the modern world, does it become more and more difficult to craft a believable plot that someone actually disappears off the face of the earth or becomes someone else because of all the technology?
It is harder. And, one of the things that happened since I started with the Jane Whitefield books is that hundreds of thousands of people have been hired and trained to prevent exactly what Jane does, because it's a national security issue, and they're very good at it. And at the same time, a lot of people are doing it. A lot of people, are sort of just disappearing. I mean, one of the things that I found out was if you look at the website of the what's it called? Something like the Bureau of Missing and Endangered People,
Yeah.
Last year, 650,000 people were reported missing. Some of them, many of them probably, are voluntarily missing, for various reasons. They have various responsibilities and things, and don't want to live up to them, or there's somebody is stalking them. Half of the people that are reported missing are women. We just don't know who these people are, and 90,000 of them per year are not found. Of those missing, those people reported missing. So, we don't know. maybe the woods are full of bodies, and maybe it's instead it's the uh, I don't know, voluntary people leaving. I once found a book, which I can't remember the name of it now, but I bought it and read it. It was a lot of interviews with people who had essentially ended their life, their current identities, and went off and became somebody else. And I found that the women that they interviewed, in the first place, they were much harder to interview. They weren't really interested in being interviewed. Were mostly scared of some man, with some issue like that. And the men, believe it or not, virtually all talked about how they had dreamed of spending the rest of their lives going fishing.
What a dichotomy.
Yeah, well, some, somebody here is a little shallow. I don't know which sex it is, but
Yeah. Yeah. Men are simple creatures. That's what it comes down to.
Oh, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, we only mature to age 14, and then that's it. That's our ceiling. Yeah. Well, Tom, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, you're
absolutely. Thank you.
Really enjoy it. And I want to ask our viewers to please click the thumbs up if you enjoyed this interview. And of course, we'd love it if you subscribed, and that way you won't miss any of our future interviews. And if you're so inclined, check out www.outlierswritinguniversity.com for those of you who might be thinking about joining the writing team and having some fun and maybe getting your own books published. Doug, back to you.
Yep. Well, again, Tom, thanks. And this concludes our time here with Thomas Perry, who is a good man, a good friend, and a great writer. And go buy his books. You will be thrilled. And we will be back, as you know, with other interviews. So this has been Get to Know on the Outliers YouTube channel. And until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep having fun. See you then.